regular season. Anthony, how you doing today?
Hey, I'm doing pretty well. I mean, yeah, you're right. Too many technical difficulties. It's like a tradition at this point, but doing well. What about you?
I'm doing all right myself. Why don't we talk about some, I guess you could say, technical difficulties with the USC offense? We're going to get into that a little bit later, but we're going to start with the good here because that's what we do on this show. We're always positive, folks. USC comes out 30-7 victory over San Jose State. They technically covered the spread. In my book, they didn't cover the spread at all. That was like a 10-point game as far as I'm concerned, maybe even a one-possession game because the scoreboard was misleading. Anthony, I don't know if you feel the same way, but why don't we start off with the good? We'll talk about some of that later, the reason why it felt like a much closer game. But Anthony, tell me, what were the biggest things you saw, the most positive signs that USC displayed in week one against San Jose State?
Yeah, you talked about it. I mean, it was a much closer game than the 30-7 score. And I know there were some positives. The ones I'm really going to focus on is the run game. I mean, the run game was practically non-existent last season, and you bring on Keontae Ingram to pair with Vavai, and that's a really good backfield. And they combined between those two, basically combined for I think 130, 153, 154 rushing yards, something around that. That's pretty impressive, and I think it kept them really in the game. And there were multiple times, I think specifically in the second quarter, where the pass game wasn't working, and we'll touch on it later. But the run game kept them in, gave them some momentum. They got some big gains, and that was really the biggest positive. You got to utilize that. Obviously, in an air raid scheme, it's pass heavy, but that run game is as important, really, to keep the defense thinking. And the run game wouldn't be as good as it was yesterday without that offensive line, which was also a question coming into the season. How would that offensive line perform? And with Clay McGuire in his debut game, I thought they did an exceptional job. It was only 2 sacks, and the 2 sacks could have mostly really been just a coverage sack with Keaton Slovis, quarterback, holding the ball too long. So those are the 2 big positives. I think that's something that you should definitely take away from this game. Keontae Ingram, for all it's worth, has just been outstanding. He was great through spring camp, fall camp, scrimmages. He's been great for this offense. Pair him with a solid veteran like Vavai, and you've got a really good run game. So there's a lot to build from there. The offensive line, who were shaky last season, obviously Alex Tucker leaves, and they can really defend that pocket, and they can create some gaps and opening gaps for running back. So those are really my 2 positives. I know you've got yours, but the run game and the offensive line.
Yeah, I want to talk.
Very great.
Yeah, no, I have some of my own too, but I think we should talk about that for a second because I think that was the most. It wasn't like the most dominant aspect of that game, but it was probably the most surprising, at least if you ask me. The reason I say that is my concerns about the running game this year coming into the season opener were they were aplenty, and the reason is that it was sort of twofold, right? One was that the offensive line was probably the biggest weakness coming in. It might still be the biggest weakness. It's only been 1 game. They looked pretty good, like you said. But that was definitely, an aspect of this team that people just didn't believe in at all, and for good reason. It wasn't that great last year, and then you lose AVT to the pros, and it's like, what do you have left? And then the other reason why I kind of doubted it was that I don't know if Graham Harrell was going to use it. Like, I think last year there was a lot more to tap into there. Granted, we said that the offensive line was shaky despite AVT, and it totally was. But I think that the running game last year was so bad, was so non-existent. I think they only had 100+ rushing yards in like 2 of 6 games, which is just horrendous. I think the reason it was so bad last year was because they didn't use it. They never established it, and then you just had nothing to work with there. So I thought that if that wasn't going to change, they weren't going to get anywhere. I was never concerned about the talent of the running back room. Ingram, Malapei, Darwin Barlow when he comes back, Brandon Campbell if he gets used. Like, you've got some talent there, right? And I think that if they were going to use that, and if they were going to, granted, maybe if the passing game was a little bit better, it would have even been more effective. But Keaton Slovis had 36 passing attempts, and USC had 34 rushes. Granted, some of those were scrambles by Slovis himself, but they used the run game effectively, and I think that, it sounds kind of simple, but the reason why they were able to use it was that they were able to use it, right? It was good. And because they had established it, it was actually somewhat effective, which is something we haven't seen any of the last few seasons. But The other thing I want to talk about too, if we're talking about the good, kind of obvious, not being very original with this take, but the defense was just awesome. Losing Isaiah Polamau was obviously concerning. Kalen Bullock comes in and fills that void, and maybe then some. I mean, he was possibly the best player on the field. That's not to say he's better than IPM, but he played great. He was outstanding. Helton talked about tonight in his post-game, Sunday evening press conference that the defensive line played pretty well. The sacks weren't there. I don't think they had one, but he said that was mainly because Starkel tended to throw the ball away, and it was, not good looks that he was doing there. It was just avoiding the sack, which I thought, he did a pretty good job of, but, they had the pressure nonetheless, and they were able to get some good pressure there. Nose tackle, the sort of middle of the defensive line, was a sort of, question mark coming into the season too. I thought the edge is obviously pretty good, but they got burnt there on like 2 back-to-back runs early in the first quarter for 8 and 9 yards or something like that. And then after that, it was pretty clean there. Linebackers played well. Chris Steele was good. The secondary was good. I don't know if the defense is actually this good. San Jose State didn't really wow me, I guess. But I mean, 7 points is 7 points. It was the fewest they've allowed in a single game since 2016, September of 2016. So I don't know. What did you see with the defense, and do you think that that's legit?
Yeah, I definitely agree with some of the points you mentioned, specifically that run defense. I mean, specifically, last season they were really giving up a lot of run plays, and they weren't able to contain it. And something that I noticed is what you just mentioned. In the first quarter, when they had those back-to-back plays, I thought, all right, here's going to be another game. The run game is just going to be dominating. Trojans aren't going to be able to stop it. But they were able to capitalize, and they were able to work, and they were able to stop it. And also the injuries that they had, Drake Jackson was in and out of this game basically the whole game. Nick Figueroa was out the entire second half. Chris Steele was injured as well. It was like a next man up type scenario where everybody just stepped up. And you mentioned it too, San Jose State. They didn't really wow you on the offensive end. But to hold the team in your first game back to single digits is pretty impressive no matter what. And I think it's also the lowest figure allowed in an opening game during Clay Helton's tenure. So that's another thing for the Fire, Clay Helton stands. But the defense is obviously, I think, legit. We'll see next week if they can continue to carry it, especially with the healthy roster. But the nose tackle position you also talked about, that's going to be a problem. I think they'll figure it out. But for now, they're legit. I really do believe that.
Yeah, and I think there's one contributor even on the offensive side where things didn't go that well. There's one contributor that really stands out as something we just have to talk about if we're going to talk about the good from this game, and that is Drake London. He was incredible. Career high 13 receptions for a career high 144 yards. I kind of noticed with him that when he was on and when they were using him and they were finding him and when he was making receptions and picking up yards, that was what carried the offense, right? The offense clicked when he clicked. He kind of went quiet for the sort of midway through the first quarter until midway through the third quarter ish. And then when he took off again, the offense took off. And I think that's a theme that you're going to see for the rest of the season, right? There were concerns about, is it really sustainable just going to Drake London every single time? Because him in single coverage against San Jose State, dude, they're gonna have nightmares about that. But that was, it was easy. It was a piece of cake for him when he's in single coverage against that team. And I heard people saying on Twitter at the game, whatever, they should go to some of the other guys, Taj Washington, which he had a nice touchdown catch too in the first quarter from Slovis on a beautiful throw. That was an athletic grab. That was just awesome. But if it's working, why is there a need to change it up, right? Drake London was just tearing them apart. USC kind of needed that spark at that point in the game. They had made it. That was when San Jose State had made it a 6-point game about in the third quarter, and it was 13-7. It was okay, are they actually going to lose? Is this going to be closer than it should be? It was closer than it should be. But then Drake London comes out, and when he goes, obviously the spark plays on the defensive side. Greg Johnson's pick six. The 4th and 6 stop inside the 10 was obviously huge, and those were the plays that kind of iced it. But the offense being able to pull away the way that it did was largely because of Drake London. And I think that that's what you're going to see when this team's struggling, when this team seems down. They're going to turn to their guys, probably their best offensive player on the field at any position, and they went to him and it worked. So I don't know. Do you have any thoughts on Drake, or is it just kind of Graham Harrell said after the game? Somebody was like, you talk about the way Drake played, and he was like, he's good, and then he said he's good in 10 different. Basically, it's like I don't know if there's really much to say about Drake. Do you have anything else to add?
Yeah, I mean, I'll go with Graham, but I mean, I disagree with the fact that the offense should live and die with Drake. I feel like it's better, when they're kind of being more balanced, and because there's so many weapons on the offensive game, and I've always been a big component for the run game. I've always been a big fan. I feel like if they can mix it up like that, try to get others involved, maybe throw in Michael Trigg in there, Michael Mepps, try to get some more run there at the tight end position. That could make just a really versatile offensive team. But I definitely do agree. I mean, Drake London was just insane. I think it's no coincidence the day after Drake drops his album, Drake London goes off in the game. You see where I'm going?
This is so embarrassing. This is so embarrassing. Leave it to you to always find a way to bring Drake the rapper into any conversation. We're going to move on because we are about 11 minutes into the show and we haven't talked about anything negative, which is I said we only talk about the good things, but we need to get to some bad because it is USC football. But I think obviously the biggest thing, and I'm basically going to get this point out of the way because it's pretty obvious, and then give it to you because you had an interesting point. But the offense to me was just pretty stagnant for the middle half of the game, midway through the first quarter until early in the fourth quarter. Like I said, when Drake London really started to make more of an impact on that game because the offense allowed him to open it up more. I'm not saying it was like his fault or anything, but they just never got into a rhythm. They never got, it really never seemed cohesive. It never seemed like they had, that great of a game plan. It was like use the tight ends a lot and then Drake London and then the run game, obviously, but like it never fit together very much until later in the game. It was just kind of stagnant. The offensive line, as we said, was pretty good. The run game was pretty good, but they weren't able to make anything happen significantly in the middle sort of, 5/8 of that game. So that was kind of concerning. But you have thoughts on that. Why don't I pass off the mic and you can, bless us with some knowledge.
Yeah. Yes, I'll do that. The offense was, the struggles were bizarre, to be honest. It just was very weird to watch. I mean, it was just like a rotational thing. The offense would have a terrible drive. The defense would get a huge stop. The offense would have a terrible drive. I mean, it was just like nonstop until about the third quarter. And I mean, after that touchdown, the Trojans didn't get a third down conversion until about midway through, not after the touchdown, about 4 minutes left in that second quarter. They didn't get a third down conversion until midway through the third. So that's a really long period of time to not convert after a third down. Just 3 and out, 3 and out, 3 and out. And the point that I was trying to make, and the one that you're talking about, is something more toward the quarterback, Keaton Slovis. I mean, I'm not sure if he was more of a hesitancy or if he was just being smart or if he was being cautious, but it seemed like something was still off, in terms of not just the deep ball. The deep ball was fine, just his decision making. There are multiple plays watching. The guy was, the receiver was wide open. He's taking his time. Maybe he's going through his reads. But, I mean, even like a game like 24-36, 24 completed passes, 34 or 36 attempts for 256 yards, 2 touchdowns, seems like a pretty good game. But I think for his standards, first of all, the 2 touchdowns, one of them came in the first quarter. The next one came in the fourth, about a couple minutes remaining when the game was basically decided. In between that time, there wasn't anything special between, for Slovis. I mean, it wasn't like he was carrying the Trojans down the field every drive. I think he was a little bit hesitant. I think there should have been more from him in this game. I'm not saying, maybe he's just not as good as we think, but I think we should have seen more from him. And, Stanford might be the game where he comes out and balls out, because the Trojans, at the end of the day, the offense lives and dies by the performance of Slovis. No matter how good the run game can be, the offensive line, if Keaton Slovis isn't at his best, I truly believe will carry USC to a potential college football playoff. And I think that his point was he just wasn't hesitant, or he was hesitant. He wasn't making quick decisions. And in the air raid offense, you got to make quick passes. You got to go short. Maybe that's just not his style. A lot of rhetorical questions, but that's really the thing. I mean, I was not impressed by his performance. Like I said, 24-36, 256 yards, 2 touchdowns seems impressive, but when you watch the game, you weren't blown away by his performance. I think that's a little interesting and something to pay attention to after the season that he had last year. So that's something to watch going into Stanford.
Okay, I'm going to disagree with you, and the reason I say that is I get that if you it isn't just by the stats, right? If you look at the stats, he had a pretty good game, and you can't use stats to sort of you can't use stats for the eye test. And I think that there's some value in the eye test, even though sports are all moving toward all these analytical statistical things, which I think is good. But anyway, outside of the second quarter, right, in the first, third, and fourth, this were Keaton Slovis's stats yesterday. 22 of 28, that's 78.6, pretty good. 245 yards, 2 touchdowns, 0 picks. That's pretty damn good, right? I don't know if I'm allowed to say that on the show, but that's pretty dang good, right? If you take out that second quarter, which was not good, I will admit that right now. But the first quarter was incredible. He started off super hot, 11 of 13, 119 yards. And I think the reason why he kind of slowed down in the second quarter there was it seemed like it wasn't self-inflicted to me. It seemed like he had basically nothing downfield. It seemed like a lot of time his only option was to try to force something, and that's not great. You don't want your quarterback forcing passes, right? That's always a recipe for disaster. But it seemed like the kinds of passes that he was trying to it seemed like the kind of passes that he was trying to force were passes that weren't going to get caught probably, but they weren't going to get picked off either, right? If there's such thing as like a safe forced pass, that's what it felt like Keaton Slovis was kind of doing. I get that he was maybe hesitant at times. Graham Harrell talked about that in the week leading up to the game. He was like, Keaton's a guy that likes to go through his reads. He likes to be, slow. He likes to be patient and all those kinds of things, but we want him to just let his talent take over. I get that. I agree. However, I think that honestly, in the middle part of that game, especially the second quarter and kind of like halfway through the third quarter too, he just didn't have very many options, right? The offense was getting nothing going. He had all day in the pocket because they were dropping 8, so we had nobody open, right? It seemed like the offense, whether it was game plan or execution or whatever it might have been, it didn't give Keaton Slovis yesterday the ideal opportunity to thrive. And it seemed like when it did, in the first quarter, in the first couple of drives, in the fourth quarter, he was pretty good. It seemed like last year, sort of the main issue that people had with him was there was no zip on his throws, right? He didn't quite have the arm strength that we knew him to have his freshman year. I saw that a lot at points yesterday. Maybe I'm just seeing things. Maybe I don't know, delusional, but that's kind of what I saw. It felt like, it wasn't his best game, and he's probably going to be better against Stanford as he was freshman year. In his first start, he was like, that was when Slovis mania kind of began. But I also want to disagree your point about the offense is dependent on him. If we look at USC's offense last year, it was pretty good, right? It wasn't bad. Like, that wasn't the reason why they lost games. They lost a game. The reason why they lost a game and the reason why they almost went 2-4 and missed out on the Pac-12 championship was that they would dig themselves in these holes, and they often weren't offensive induced. They were penalties. It was discipline. It was defense, right? It was they would go down so big, and the offense would kind of stall at times. But fourth quarter Keaton Slovis was something else. I mean, fourth quarter Keaton Slovis last year was just incredible, and it seems like Keaton Slovis's floor is so high that he's not going to be the issue, right? It's going to be the offensive line. It's going to be establishing the run game. It's going to be, is there anybody else outside of Drake London? There were some of those things yesterday. They were lacking some of those things. Some of those things they were lacking they didn't really need, like other guys outside Drake London when he's tearing them up in one-on-one. You don't really need anybody else. It's great to have Taj Washington there. You don't really need that much else when Drake London's taking over the game like that. What do you think?
No, yeah. I mean, I agree with the first point about the hesitancy. That was one of my points. I was just curious, was it hesitancy or was it just him going through his reads, going through the scheme? That's just the main thing. But to your point about the offense, those are the other questions that, if there's a lack of wide receiver depth, that there's not much Slovis can do. That's a good point. But I think at the end of the day, when the game's on the line, Slovis has got to make those big plays. He's got to figure out a way to get them through it. And that's what he did last season, and you got to continue that this season. And, obviously the freshman year Slovis mania is a different conversation. 2 years ago. So you got to prove it again. We have to see it. And that zip that was gone last season, it's got to show up again. And it's not like I'm saying it was a bad performance. Maybe just my expectations are too high. He's got to show up. I'm not saying he didn't show up, but I want that 300-yard, 3-touchdown, slowest game where he's just dominant and he can make the big plays. Because we know he can do it. We just want to see it.
Okay. Oh, yeah. I got you. We will see that, I promise. Let's get into some of the rest of the Pac-12. It was not a pretty opening weekend for the Pac-12 North. I'm going to touch on that briefly just to set the scene for what we're going to talk about next. Washington State loses to Utah State, powerhouse Utah State, that is. Cal falls to Nevada at home. Washington loses 13-7 to perennial college football heavyweight Montana. Oregon State, who we saw some flashes from last season, and I don't know, I was kind of hopeful for them this year. I think the Beavs are kind of fun. They lose to Purdue. Oregon, they beat Fresno State. It wasn't pretty. I guess USC knows a lot about unpretty week 1 wins against Fresno State. And Stanford, 24-7 to Kansas State. That's not very good. When you look at the South in comparison, it was dominant. Utah wins 40-17. Granted, Weber State, sure, whatever. Arizona State wins 41-14. Granted, Southern Utah, sure, whatever. These opponents, by the way, are on par with a lot of the opponents that beat Pac-12 North teams. So I don't want to hear a ton of that. Colorado, 35-7 over Northern Colorado, as expected, but still. And USC, obviously, with the 30-7 victory over San Jose State. Arizona falls to 24-16 to BYU, but, you know, Arizona, whatever, we didn't really have high hopes for them anyway. And then UCLA, a week after the 44-10 victory over Hawaii, comes in with a rather impressive victory over LSU. I don't have the score in front of me right now, but it was multiple scores. It looked pretty good. Anthony, what are your takeaways from the first week of non-USC Pac-12 South competition? Are the Trojans in trouble? And I say that not because, you know, USC isn't this good football team. I think that they are a good football team, but are the walls closing in? Is somebody else coming for the Trojans' top spot in the Pac-12 South?
I don't think so. It's only the first week. I mean, you mentioned it right there. I mean, it's the week 1 of non-conference play. I think the narrative is building already with UCLA and that LSU win, the Hawaii win. They're impressive wins, but you got to keep it up and got to be consistent. I think the South, the tide is turning, though. I think the South is going to become the more competitive side of the Pac-12. I know my Pac-12 North haters, the Twitter DMs are open. We can talk. But I think it's happening. I mean, you look at Arizona State, all the momentum that's been riding with them, UCLA and Chip Kelly's business. I mean, they're up and coming. So you put those two up there. USC, that's a top 3 that's very difficult to deal with. I think the Trojans, you know, it's in their hands. If they want it, they've got it. You know, UCLA and Arizona State, they've got to prove it throughout the season. But then again, you never know what can happen. But I don't think the Trojans are in trouble. It's only the first week. Maybe by week 5, week 6, it might be different, but we'll have to see.
I don't think they're in trouble, so to speak, but I don't think it's going to be as easy as we may have thought, right? I think we kind of saw this season as like USC and Utah. I'm not as high on Utah as some other people are, but Utah and USC were supposed to be like the top 2. And then there's Arizona State and UCLA, which could both be decent, but, you know, they should have taken care of those. But now, I mean, tell me, between Arizona State, Utah, UCLA, and Colorado, how many of those do you think are surefire wins? I've got 2. I think Arizona and Colorado are going to be the only surefire wins. But the other 3, I mean, we know that this team is prone to losing games that they probably shouldn't lose, and they're prone to losing games that, you know, matter late in the season. Pac-12 road games, some of those trap games are always a problem for them. Rivalry games, you never know what's going to happen there. There might be a dogfight between USC, Utah, Arizona State, UCLA for the Pac-12 South. Anything can happen there. I don't think they're going to wind up going 2-3 among Pac-12 South competitors, but I think that those are 3 games that they might lose. And based on week 1, I don't know. It'll be tough.
Yeah. If I could add just one thing real quick.
Yeah.
I think the difference between this year and previous years is those other teams like Arizona State or Utah, UCLA, they want it more than previous years. I mean, UCLA and Arizona State especially, I feel like they're really, really into this, and they're really buying into the fact that they can steal that Pac-12 South title. And they obviously have some history between themselves and USC. So I think that's really the main difference. There's something there, and they're more hungry to kind of take that title.
Real quick before we wrap up here, I didn't watch the Stanford game, but I'm gonna put you on the spot a little bit. Based only on the fact that they lost 24-7 to Kansas State, what do you got? USC Stanford week 2. What happens? Who win? I'd say who wins. I think I know the answer there, but what does that game look like? Is it ever going to be close? Is it going to be kind of like the week 1 where it's close, after 2 or 3 quarters, and then they kind of pull away, or is it just going to be, basically demolition from start to finish?
I definitely don't think it's going to be a demolition. Stanford losing to Kansas State, that's a tough one. But at the end of the day, conference games, you never know what could happen. I think they're going to come out with some more juice. It's going to be close, but in the beginning, and then USC will not necessarily demolish them, but they'll take care of business and they'll get away with the win.
Yeah, honestly, I think it's going to be kind of a blowout. I don't know. Maybe I'm wrong. Again, these are all one reactionary knee-jerk takes. Maybe Stanford's a lot better than I'm giving them credit for. I don't know. I think home game, USC should be able to take care of that pretty easily. The stadium should be packed way more than it was this week. But by the way, they said attendance at that game was 55,000.
No.
There's no way. There's no way there were only 22,000 empty seats in that stadium. Next week, though, I get it. San Jose State, it was like 95 degrees, 2:00 game, whatever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's the first game back, but it's not the one that you're like marking on the calendar, months out. But Stanford, 7:30 p.m. at the Coliseum, Pac-12 opener. If that's not sold out or pretty close to sold out and full, we got a problem.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I mean, 2 p.m. on a Saturday in September. Does not sound like a good football date.
No, and it was not a good football date for San Jose State especially.
Yeah.
But that's going to do it for the first 2021 regular season episode of Trojan Dash. As a reminder, make sure to follow us on all of our various social media platforms: Facebook, Instagram, TikTok, Twitter. I'm just naming platforms. I think we have most of those. Follow me and Anthony on Twitter. Our handles are right there. And make sure to tune in next week as well, 8 p.m. You know where to find us. Dash Sports TV, Trojan Dash. Coming after a week 2 game against Stanford that Anthony says will be pretty close. I'm not entirely sure. Anthony, any final?
Hold on. I said close in the beginning, and then they'll separate themselves.
Yeah, that would be a very USC way to win. We will talk to